Dear students, dear colleagues, welcome to the sixth webinar of the CIPUS Network, Women Writers in History. In the last webinar, we explored the topic of women writers who crossed geographical borders, but also other boundaries. I suppose that the division between high and popular literature could also be seen as a particular kind of a boundary. While it was somehow accepted that women wrote popular literature, their efforts to break into the realm of high literature were often perceived as ridiculous attempts to participate in the realm reserved for male writers. Moreover, their writings were labeled as popular literature, even though this description was not accurate. Therefore, it is very important that we address these issues in our webinars, and I am very glad that today's speaker addresses this intrinsic problem by connecting it to Croatian literature. So let me briefly introduce Dr. Maša Grdičić. She is an assistant professor at the Department for Comparative Literature, Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, University of Zagreb, Croatia. She has a degree in comparative literature and Croatian language and literature and received her PhD from the University of Zagreb in 2003. She is the author of 3 books in Croatian with following English titles: Cosmopolitics, Cultural Studies, Feminism and Women's Magazines, then Introduction to Narratology, and The Pitfalls of Being Polite, Essays on Feminism and Popular Culture. And she is also co-editor of 7 proceedings of the academic conference Maria Jurić Zagorka, Life, Work, Heritage. She is one of the founders and editors of MOVE, a Croatian feminist website. Her research areas are narrative theory, feminist theory, and cultural studies. In today's presentation, as I have already mentioned, she will compare 2 Croatian women writers active in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Jagoda Truhelka and Maria Jurić Zagorka, as examples of high and popular literature by exploring their differences and similarities. So Maša, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Katja. And hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be able to speak to you today on this topic. I will first go on to say something about Jagoda Truhelka, and then we'll try to give you some of the context of a Croatian modernism, of Croatian modern literature. Then I will introduce Zagorka into the fold and then try to compare these 2 authors. And as Katja said, I will try to find, of course, some of their obvious differences, but I will try to highlight some of their similarities as well. So first on to Jagoda Truhelka. This is a picture of her on the right side, and some just basic information on her life and work. Both Truhelka and Zagorka were born in the second part of the 19th century, and they both died in the same year, 1957. Truhelka was born in Osijek in eastern Croatia, and she arrived in Zagreb in 1892, when Zagreb was beginning to become a European metropolis and was closer than ever before to Fin de siècle Europe. But Truhelka was first and foremost a teacher and a pedagogue, and she worked in secondary schools for girls and was a principal in some of these schools in Zagreb, in Osijek, and in Sarajevo in Bosnia and Herzegovina. She is mostly remembered as an author of children's and young adult fiction, and she was also an author of pedagogical articles. She wrote short stories also, and most of her texts were either published in her own name, but she also had a gender-neutral pseudonym, A.M. Sandučić, and with a fellow teacher and pedagogue, Maria Jambrišak, she founded one of the first women's feminine art magazines, The Hearth, or Home and Hearth, Domaće ognjište, in 1900. But I want to talk to you today about her novel, her literary novel for adults, not for children, which is called Plen Er, and it was published in serialized form in the literary magazine Nada in 1897. Ruhelka was always well regarded and respected as a teacher, and she fought against prejudice towards educated women. And I think it's important to highlight that she even audited several classes at the University of Zagreb at the time when women weren't allowed to enroll at the faculty, but she did audit several classes, this is, I think, very important. Also, what I want to highlight is that this novel, Plen Er, which was published in the literary magazine in 1897, was never reprinted until 100 years later, in 1997, when it was published in book form for the first time. And since then, it had one more edition. So as you can see, Ruhelka wasn't really remembered in Croatian literary history as a modern writer. She was mostly remembered, again, as a children's author, a young adult author. And I think this is very, very important because of the way that we remember and forget women writers and the way that we discover and rediscover them. So this is why I want to say something about the context of modernity in Croatian literature. And I wrote about this already and I spoke about this. So some of you know already, and this will maybe be something that you've heard before. But Croatian literature, especially Croatian new literature, is very specific and different from Western literature because I think it always lags behind a bit. And newer Croatian literature started at the beginning of the 19th century with the Croatian revival, cultural revival. And through the whole of 19th century, it was most important that literature be didactic, educational, enlightening, and literature was seen as a weapon in the fight for Croatian national independence. So the utilitarian function and the social critique was always important in Croatian literature, and this emphasis on the utilitarian function was strong even at the beginning of the 20th century, when modern literature was supposed to be dominant and the aesthetic function was supposed to be the primary function. But we can see even in the novels that have most modernist elements, still we can see this utilitarian function and this political and ideological functions that Croatian literature has. So Croatian literary history wanted to highlight modern texts, modern novels, modern literature, and this is why Croatian literary history mostly privileges high literature over popular literature, privileges modernism over realism. But I think the complete story of Croatian modernity is very different. And this is especially true when it comes to the novel. And I want to mention Professor Krešimir Nemec here, who wrote a complete history of the Croatian novel. And this history is really instructive because it shows that there were so few real modernist novels, avant-garde novels. You could count them on the fingers of one hand. And modernism was mostly expressed in poetry, short story, and drama, and very little in the novel. So most of the novels written, and especially in the period until the First World War, but then even until the Second World War, were either still written in the realist and naturalist tradition or were just popular novels. So it is important to state that modernism was by no means the only literary paradigm at the turn of the century in Croatia, and other poetics were also present, such as realist and naturalist, but also popular fiction was a widespread literary trend. And when you see all the novels that Krešimir Nemec read and wrote about, and these are all the novels published in Croatia at the time, you can see that modernist novels are a minority, and that only some of those novels were able to be represented in Croatian literary history and become part of the Croatian literary canon. And unfortunately, Jagoda Truhelka's novel Plein Air was not one of them. And we have rediscovered it just recently, 20 years ago, when it was first published as a book in 1997. So I guess you could say that there was no real reception of this novel before 1997 in Croatian literary history, which is, I think, a great shame, because Krešimir Nemec and Dunja Detoni Dujmić, who is one of the literary historians who writes about women's literature in Croatia, although from a perspective that's slightly different than mine, she doesn't really highlight she doesn't really come to the writers from a feminist perspective, but her work is really important because she is one of the first scholars to write about women authors and to research women authors, which I think is very, very important. So this is why I'm quoting her now. What she wrote about Jagoda Truhelka's novel Plein Air, where she says that this novel presents the beginning of modern women's writing in Croatian literature. But she says it also presents the beginning of Croatian literary modernity. And Krešimir Nemec, in his history of the Croatian novel, says that Plein Air offers a new type of female character in Croatian literary history, the intellectually superior woman in the character of Zdenka Posavec. So this is what I would like to say about the Dunja Detoni Dujmić quote, where she says, okay, the beginning of modern women's writing, but I think it's really important to say that this is the beginning of Croatian literary modernity, and especially in the novelistic form. There were some short stories before that are seen as the beginning of Croatian aestheticism, but this novel is one of the first novels that is a psychological novel that is interested in portraying the inner lives of characters, female and male characters, and it offers a psychological analysis of the relations between men and women. And I think it is a shame that this novel isn't part of the official literary history in Croatia, because some of the other novels that are part of the official literary history are similar to Plein Air, even though they were published after 1897, and they are also a light, they offer a light modernism in the way that Plein Air does. And they are just mostly psychological novels that focus on the inner lives of their characters, but also retain a sort of realistic plot and have some popular elements. So this is, I think, typical of the Croatian novel in the first decades of the 20th century, until Krleža, I think. And I think it's not fair that Plein Air isn't among those novels that are most often mentioned as modernist or early modern novels. So another thing that I think is really important that Krešimir Nemec says, that this is and I was surprised myself to read this. And then when I thought about it, it is true. The first consistent first-person narration in the history of the Croatian novel, the first consistent autodiegetic narrator in any novel in Croatian history. There were some in short stories and novellas, but this is the first person narration in a novel. So I think this is very important for any literary history, and of course for Croatian literary history. But the first person narrator isn't Zdenka, the female character, the heroine of the novel, but Vlatko, Vlatko Urbanic, a young man who is infatuated and interested in Zdenka because she presents a different kind of woman. Until Truhelka's novel, most of the female characters in Croatian 19th century were either presented as ideal types, angels in the house, or femme fatales, demonic types, just sort of establishing the same binary that is present in Western literature. So Zdenka is an important character because she is one of the first or the first heroine that is based on more realistic principles, that isn't idealized in any way. And also, which is interesting, I think she brings some important feminist ideas of the time into the novel and into the Croatian novel, into Croatian literary history. Vlatko is the narrator of this novel. I think this is very important because we see Zdenka from a masculine perspective, which necessarily makes her a mysterious and interesting character. Vlatko can't really understand her because he's never met a woman that was like her. His sister is a typical young woman, interested mostly in clothes and fun, but Zdenka is a very serious person, and through his relationship with her, Vlatko will slowly undergo the process of sentimental education. He will change his culturally defined views of women and femininity. Zdenka is strange to him because she is independent and she firmly believes in a woman's right to choose her own path in life, to remain unmarried, or to work for a living. And Zdenka works for a living. She supports her elderly father by being an artist. She's a painter, but she also is a teacher, and she teaches drawing and painting to young girls. So Zdenka is not only presented as a feminist, independent woman, she is also presented as a woman artist. And this kind of character is also important for Croatian literary history. And she is portrayed in a way that is very familiar to us, I think, because it reminds us of other women artist characters in Western literature. And she especially reminds me of the character of Helen Graham in Anne Bronte's novel, The Tenants of Wildfell Hall, published in 1848. And they have so many similarities, so I will try to highlight some of them because I think maybe you might find this also interesting. Zdenka is similar to Helen Graham because they both share an anxiety of female authorship, a fear of a sort of punishment that might befall them for attempting to write or to paint, which was magnificently written about by Sandra Gilbert and Susan Gubar in their book Mad Woman in the Attic. And they specifically write about Helen Graham and Bronte's novel, The Tenants of Wildfell Hall. And I will first read you these citations from Plein Air. These are Zdenka's words. She knows that she is talented. Everybody thinks that she is very talented, but Zdenka is not confident in her artistic talent, and she firmly denies all serious artistic aspirations. And this is what she says: "Artist? No, that I am not. That was once my dream. That I possess talent, that I know how to skillfully imitate, this I know. But what makes the artist a bright soul, unrelenting faith in myself, this I do not have. Therefore, I will not succeed in creating something permanent. And later on in the novel, she says, because there is no more strength left in me, and to reach it through force and effort, I do not want that. I'm afraid of fighting. I'm afraid of myself, of the desire for glory arising in me. I want peace, peace, and serenity. So the lack of confidence is obvious, but there is also this interesting fear of the desire for glory and the desire of public acknowledgement and public fame, because even though Zdenka is aware of her talent, she knows that it is very different for a woman than for a man to seek public acknowledgement and public fame. And this is, I think, where her anxiety comes from. And we can then maybe conclude that this anxiety she feels is connected to the problem of her gender, just as in the case of Helen Graham. And Helen says in The Tenants of Wildfell Hall, I have often wished in vain for another's judgment to appeal to when I could scarcely trust the direction of my own eye and head. So this shows an equal lack in confidence in her artistry. So Gilbert and Gubar write about Helen Graham that her strained relationship to art is determined almost entirely by her gender, and they highlight the way she uses art to camouflage and to express herself at the same time. So if you remember that in the novel, when she meets her first husband, who will later be revealed to be an alcoholic and an abuser, Arthur Huntington, she draws sketches of him, portraits of him, on the back of her other drawings. So all her drawings have a front and a back, and on the front are her sketches and drawings that are seen as social accomplishments for a young lady. And on the other side, Gilbert and Gubar say, are her true desires. And then she erases his images because she doesn't want others to see. But then when he rummages through her drawings, he finds some pictures that weren't erased, and then concludes that she likes him, that she's in love with him. And this is the beginning then of their unhappy romance. And this is really interesting because of the idea of a front and a back. And then this is similar to a very important scene in Plein Air, when Vlatko comes to see Zdenka in her apartment in Vienna, where she lives with her father. He enters her room, and in that moment, a little accident happens. A picture that she has hanging on the wall falls down because it was badly fastened. And then this picture, this is a reproduction of a painting by Franz von der Fregel, and it's called The Madonna. And this is the picture that Zdenka had a reproduction of on the wall. And when the picture falls down, Vlatko can see what's drawn on the other side. And there's Zdenka's drawing of the most important and the most traumatic event of her life. It's a drawing of her wedding day, when she was supposed to get married for the man that she loved. But instead of getting married to him, she found out that he had a child with another woman. And she refused to go through with the wedding, even though her father and her friends and relatives pressured her to do it for financial reasons. And this was a crucial moment for her because she had to decide that she will break off the engagement, and that would mean that her father and her family will be poor. And in that same moment, she had to decide that she will provide for her family by painting and by teaching. And this is what she draws. She draws the moment in front of the church when the young woman comes with the baby in her arms and Zdenka is in her wedding dress. And it's a tragic and traumatic moment for her. But she decides that this man should marry the woman, that he made pregnant, and that she will stay single. And this is her life now. She provides for her family, and she is single and independent. And she is very of love and of relationships, and also is scared to enter in a relationship with Vlatko because of what has happened to her. So this is, I think, very interesting because it's very literal. You have the Madonna on one side, Madonna because she might be a symbol of feminine passivity and compliance. And then on the other side, on the hidden side, the reverse side, there is the author's double, this traumatic, angry Zdenka, where she draws her true feelings, her true desires, which are beyond the Madonna, on the reverse side of the Madonna, and so on. So I think this is an interesting connection to Helen Graham. I haven't really found any proof that Truhelka read The Tenets of Wildfell Hall, so this just might be a coincidence, but it's interesting because it kind of proves Gilbert and Gubar's point of women authors insisting on these double-edged narratives to show their true feelings and their anger at their position in society. So we see that Zdenka is not confident as an artist, that she feels anxiety of authorship, and nevertheless, she is the spokesperson for feminist ideas in the novel. So it is not surprising then that she is the one who pushes Vlatko to come to a decision about her and their relationship. And she is the one who takes charge. She asks him what his intentions are with her, and he is shocked. She tells him, I also have my free will to take it or to leave it. And Vlatko can't handle it at that moment. He entered their acquaintance intrigued by this mysterious and unfamiliar woman. He even planned at the beginning to conquer this proud creature. So when Zdenka demands to know where she stands, he is very surprised and shocked. And this is what he later writes. I felt like a child whose favorite toy was broken by someone with a relentless hand. I couldn't find the words to answer. All my ideas, which I nurtured about femininity, about its fine feeling, about the meekness of women, about their beautiful obedience, all the fragile adornment with which tradition has clothed our ideal of femininity, all this crumbled before me, and I myself, seeing this deity collapse, felt that the ground beneath me is disappearing, the ground on which the self-government of my sex has placed me high, and from which it was only my will to reach for that ideal and to be proud of it, like royal spoils, at the same time as a happy man, or to leave it. So this is obviously written from the perspective of an older Vlatko, who writes this novel, who writes his story in a retrospective fashion. Mostly the first person narrator is close to young Vlatko's perspective, to the perspective of the experiencing self. But I think in this particular example, you can see the older Vlatko, the narrating self, where he is aware of his prejudices and the mistakes that he made. Because he says this, the self-government of my sex has placed me high, and he wasn't really aware of that in the moment when this was happening. So this is a later epiphany that he has had. Vlatko will, in this moment, accuses Zdenka of being unfeminine, of not being a real woman, not behaving like a real woman because of her independence and her assertiveness. She is unfeminine. And it will take lots of time for him to come to understand that his attraction to Zdenka stems precisely from her differences. And he later does say this, from her quick mind, ruthless sincerity, love for the truth, the desire for personal human freedom of thought and action. Zdenka believes everybody should have this freedom, men and women, not only men. And From this idea, from this manifesto of Zdenka's, comes the title of the novel, Plein Air, which of course is the name of an painterly technique used in Impressionism, painting outside, outdoors. But it also stands for Zdenka's manner of communication, clarity, sincerity. Vlatko has outdated ideas of femininity, and he expects to see them performed by Zdenka. He describes femininity as poetry. It's a mystique for him. But Zdenka strives for complete transparency of thoughts and feelings and clarity of speech. And this is the meaning of Plein Air in the novel. Zdenka's manner, Zdenka's way. And this is also the purpose of Plein Air, in the function of Plein Air in the novel, demystifying femininity, liberating the concept of woman from dominant social definitions. And I think this is precisely why the masculine point of view was used, in order to show how the somewhat immature protagonist changes his preconceived ideas of what it means and what it does not mean to be a woman. The purpose of the novel is in this way didactic and educational, and the focus is on disengaging Zdenka's character from literary and cultural myths and archetypes, such as the angel in the house or the femme fatale. It is therefore no coincidence that the image that represents the truth about her first wedding is hidden under the image of the Mother of God, a symbol of an obedient and submissive woman. The real Zdenka is on the reverse side of the Madonna, where all the other active female characters are. So this is the end for now of Plein Air and Struhelka. I will come back to her in my conclusion, but I would like to introduce Zagorka to you now, and see what is different in her work from the dominant strands of Croatian modernity. So I have also written about Zagorka before, so I will try to keep this short so I don't repeat myself too much. As you can see, Zagorka was not only a novelist, a writer, but a journalist, and she was also politically active. She was an activist for women's rights and workers' rights and peasants' rights. And she started to write popular fiction in 1910 with the first Croatian crime novel, The Duchess of Petrinska Street. And next year, she started to write her first big novelistic project, The Witch of Grič. And she wrote many popular historical novels and romances, and one of them, Gordana, is the longest novel in Croatian and one of the longest novels in the world. It has 12 parts and almost 9,000 pages. And she also wrote the first Croatian science fiction novel. There's a lot of firsts with Zagorka, as you can see, as well as with Struhelka. And I think it's really important that both are women and both have these lots of firsts in Croatian literary history. So I want to first go on to say something about the form of Zagorka's popular novels, because this is important. They are not typical popular historical romances, and they present a formal departure from the 19th century model of the popular historical novel in Croatian literary history. And one of the most important researchers of Zagorka, Stanko Lasic, explained this in a very interesting way. He explained that she replaced the traditional closed narrative model of the historical novel of the 19th century with something he calls the freedom principle. And he says that it manifests itself in the radical infinity of the narrative structure of her popular novels, which is obvious in the case of Gordana with its 9,000 pages, but it is also very visible in her other novels because they are structured on the principle of endless expansion. So if you think that the story is ending, that it's coming to a close, something new can happen anytime and move the story forward. So you're never certain that the end is the real end. Something can always unbalance the narrative. But what I think is most important in Zagorka's historical romances is the way that she combines history and romance. And I think it's special and it's different because it is based on the importance of the female characters, of the female heroines, which are the main characters of all Zagorka's novels. So Zagorka wanted to write about the role of women in Croatian history in order to politically agitate her women readers. But information about the participation of women in historical events was very scarce. So she tried to solve this problem by combining the historical novel with romance in order to introduce female heroines into the historical novel. This was, it seemed, the only way. She had to introduce them in the historical novel as romantic heroines, as love interests of the male heroes who actually participated in true historical events. So this is the historical part, the reliable part, the realist part of her historical romances. But once the women characters were the main characters, they started to participate in the story and they started to participate in historical events in the story and weren't only passive love interests, but became actors in presented historical events. And this is, I think, what makes her novels so contemporary still, because of these subversive female heroines, female characters. This is a utopian moment in her romance novels, where she imagines the possible, the ideal, the possibility of women's influence on Croatian history. So in this way, in this specific combination, her novels become a fantasy of women's power. And I think this is what makes them radical and subversive. And it doesn't, they don't grow old because of this. They are still fresh to read today. And even though they agitate for the idea of the Croatian nation, which is not, which is an old idea, I think, and isn't as timely as the idea of female independence. It is precisely this idea of an independent heroine that participates in historical events that makes these novels so fresh and so on trend. Okay, so in the last part of my presentation, I will try to compare and contrast Truhelka and Zagorka on the basis of differences and similarities between popular and high literature. And I will call on theories of popular culture, popular literature by Anthony Eashope and Ken Gelder. And I will just briefly try to refresh these ideas for you. Anthony Eashope, in his book Literary and Cultural Studies from 1991, tries to explore the difference between popular and high literature on two examples. One is Joseph Conrad's modernist classic, The Heart of Darkness, and the other is Edgar Rice Burroughs' novel Tarzan. So he compares these two novels and comes up with three arguments, three propositions, where he tries to see similarities and differences between the two novels and popular and high culture. So the first one is ideology, and he says that ideology, political ideas are more transparent, more clear, more explicit in Tarzan, in popular literature, and in Heart of Darkness, they are more complex and layered, more implicit, harder to read, harder to interpret. But both texts, both types of texts, display ideology. Then he goes on to try to see the difference between different textualities present in Heart of Darkness and in Tarzan. And it's easy, I think, easier to compare a modernist novel and a popular novel than it would be to maybe today try to compare the textuality of a well-written bestseller and a well-written crime novel. I think they would be much more similar than Heart of Darkness and Tarzan, but his argument is, of course, that textuality in Heart of Darkness is more complex than the textuality of Tarzan, which is literal and only connotative and very simple, and doesn't have any metaphors, and will not withstand the modernist reading. So it doesn't have multiple meanings. It's very easy to decipher. It means what it says, and so on. And the third argument is the subject and position in these types of literature, where he sees high literature as hard work and popular literature as leisure. And high literature is based on the reality principle, while popular literature promotes the pleasure principle. And on the other hand, we have Ken Gelder and his 2004 book, Popular Fiction, The Logics and Practices of a Literary Field, where he tries to find the difference between high and popular fiction, or literary fiction and popular fiction, in a different way. He tries to to research popular fiction as a field, as an entire apparatus of production, distribution, consumption, and not just as texts. So I will try to use these ideas in the comparison between Truhelka and Zagorka, between plein air on the one hand and Zagorka's popular romances on the other hand. So if we start from the question of the field of popular literature, the field of literature, and think about the problems of industry and entertainment, we will see a difference here. So Plein Air was published in a literary journal, and it wasn't reprinted until 1997. It was published in serialized form, but then most Croatian novels were published in literary journals in serialized form, and then later as books. But we see that Plein Air wasn't published as a book until much later. So Truhelka really isn't remembered, I think, until now, when she was rediscovered. She hardly had any reception at all. So it's really hard to think of her as popular literature in the way of distribution and consumption. On the other hand, Zagorka fits the bill perfectly. Her novels were published in serialized form, but mostly in daily and weekly newspapers aimed at a wide audience. Her popular novels were republished many times in serialized form and later in book forms. Even though she's mostly ignored by traditional literary historians, and was first studied in the 70s and 80s when Croatian literary critics became interested in trivial or popular literature. And then later in the 90s, and more recently from the perspective of feminist and cultural studies critics, mostly women. Truhelka is not studied as extensively as Zagorka. As you have heard, Zagorka has her conference, which is held for more than 10 years. And I was really surprised and saddened to find out that there was only one article about Plein Air after the text published by Dunja Detoni Dujmić and Krešimir Nemec. So this is a field waiting to be written about, waiting to be discovered. So the difference is in the way these texts are distributed, produced, distributed, consumed. And there are differences in genre. of course, but there are also similarities in genre. So the differences in genre are the ones that I have mentioned. Plein Air is a psychological novel that is on the brink of modernism, that has some modern elements. And Zagorka's novels are mostly historical romances, but she does have a later feminist novel from 1938, which is called The Stone in the Road. And it has some similarities to Trúchylka because it does have some modernist elements, like it's written in the present tense. It has parts of interior monologue, diary entries, and so on. So it is focused on a psychological portrait of the heroine. But on the other hand, there are some similarities in genre, which I want to highlight now. Both of these types of texts, Plein Air on the one side and Zagorka's novels on the other side, have didactic elements. They are very clear in displaying their ideology, which is feminist ideology mostly, but also Croatian nationalist ideology at a time when Croatia was under Austro-Hungarian rule. These didactic elements are important, I think, but it's also important to note that Plein Air also has a romantic narrative structure. It functions as a romance novel as well as a psychological novel. And this makes it very hard to draw a clear line between Trúchylka and Zagorka and say this is high literature and this is popular literature. This really blurs the boundary between high and popular literature, because this romantic narrative structure is so important for both of the novels. And Plein Air can be read as a romance as well, as a love story between Vlatko and Zdenka. So if we come back to Easthope's terms, textuality and ideology, we can see that there are some similarities in the textuality of these texts because they are based on the romance plot. They have constructed their romantic heroines in an ideal way. They fit the definition, Janice Radway's definition from reading the romance perfectly, where she states that the ideal heroine of the romance novel has to be beautiful but not perfect. She has to be exceptional and different in her looks. She has to be intelligent. She has to have a sense of humor, independence, a fiery character, and she can be unfeminine even for people used to conventional femininity. So romantic heroines are often constructed as androgynous. And this is in Zagorka's and Trúchylka's texts tied to the ideology of the novels, which is, as I have already said, explicitly feminist. And then there is something that I would like to highlight now, because I think this is very important, an important comparison between Trúchylka and Zagorka, where we see their heroines constructed as androgynous, but from the perspective of other characters, they are seen as unfeminine, and they're seen as women with some sort of mistake because they behave in a masculine way. They behave as men. So in Plein Air, Zdenka's brother says about her that she has an audacious will, and he says, "It is a pity she is not a man. She could have made something of herself." And this sentence really resonates with me because it reminds me so much of so many sentences in Zagorka's work, which repeat the same thing. And these are just some of them. From The Duchess of Petrinska Street, she can remain persistently silent, which is rare even in a man. It is a pity you are not a man. I would then have a stepson in high office from the Republicans. Then, too bad she is not a man. This girl has a truly masculine mind, from A Stone in the Road. And these two other quotations are also from A Stone in the Road. She doesn't look like a girl. Her whole countenance is that of an audacious boy. I feel as if I'm speaking to a young man who is defending his principles, but in women, we recognize one principle only: love and marriage. So these sentences are so common in Zagorka's novels, in her popular novels, and in her feminist novel, A Stone in the Road. And they are, I think, can be best described as a way that the reality principle ruins the pleasure principle in these examples. And if Aesop says that popular literature is based on the pleasure principle, these are some examples where the reality principle crashes in a very painful and traumatic way. I use the word painful because this, I think, is important for Zagorka. This is a very painful common motive found across Zagorka's work, demonstrating the way that her popular romances transcend the limits of romance, because they openly show that the equality of these independent androgynous heroines with men is impossible, unintelligible, in a society that may acknowledge their intelligence and other masculine qualities, but will still regard them as a mistake in a woman, as a useless surplus in a woman, and an obstacle in obtaining the ultimate feminine goal, which is marriage. So I will end then with marriage, because the endings of these novels are mostly happy endings in a conventional way. We call them happy because the hero and heroine get married, and it ends mostly with their wedding. But the way Plein Air ends is highly precarious and problematic, and I think unsatisfying, because Zdenka has to break her right arm, her painting arm, in an accident that was caused by Vlatko and his uncautious driving. And she seems to stop having a will of her own, and she stops painting, and she just kind of surrenders to him and agrees to marry him. So this is the ending of Plein Air, unfortunately. A compromise between the romance plot and the feminist politics of the novel. But this is also true for most of Zagorka's romances, that the ending really comes after so many postponements of the happy end. So we are never really sure if this is the final episode. There can always be another episode. There can always be another event that will ruin the chances of the hero and heroine getting together. So in this way, the happy end feels untenable when it finally arrives, because it was postponed so many times. But also many times the hero is still not reformed in a way that would, I think, satisfy the heroine completely. And his mistakes are still present, and their struggles are not always resolved until the end. And so this ending comes almost in the last 5 minutes. Okay, so what I'm trying to say here, I think, is very simple. I want to say that Zagorka's work isn't simply popular, and that Truhelka's work isn't simply literary, and that the relationship between high and popular women's writing is complex, more complex than maybe traditional literary history will lead us to believe. And also that the field of modernist literature in Croatia is different from the dominant presentations of the field, and that only an insight into the whole literary history, all of the novels written at the time, will help us see the true role of women writers at the time, and will help us maybe discover them and rediscover them, and try to include them in our research, include them in the school curriculum and academic curriculum. And then in the end, I just want to read a quote from Laura Mulvey from her text, Notes on Cirque Melodrama, concerning the problematic endings of these novels. When she talks about melodrama, but I think it can be compared to romantic fiction also, she says, the strength of the melodramatic form lies in the amount of dust the story raises along the road, a cloud of overdetermined irreconcilables which put up a resistance to being neatly settled in the last 5 minutes. And this is, I think, what I want to highlight here, that we can't settle anything neatly in the last 5 minutes. And that the problems that I tried to talk about now are way more complex, of course, than the way I have presented them, but also more complex than the way they were presented to us in Croatian literary history until now. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Masha, for this excellent and very, very rich presentation. I really enjoyed every minute of it. And especially I like your comparisons between Truhelka and Bronte. I think this is really impressive. These parallels are really impressive. And also your references to Gilbert and Guber when they talk about these double-edged narratives. Thank you also for these beautiful paintings by Croatian female painters. It is really nice to see them as well. And now I'm sure that there are many comments and questions from the audience. So please just pose a question. We are a small group, so I think that you don't have to raise digitally your hand. So just ask. I will just change my view. So any questions or comments?
I'm sorry, I would maybe would be better if I speak rather than write, because it would take me too much time. Hello, Masha. I'm Diana Vastinevichova from the Department of Slavonic and Balkan Studies at Charles University, and I'm writing PhD thesis on this topic. I actually do write about Jagura Truhelka plein air, which I compared to Kamen na cesty by Maria Judith Zagorka.
Wonderful, great.
And as well with Ivana Berlic-Mažuranić, approach to the author and difference in approaching the works of these authors and their reception in Croatian literary history and society as well. And what actually, I completely agree with you that the ending of the novel Plein Air is quite abrupt. And I think it could relate to her social stance, the teacher, that she's a teacher and public institution. And I think it could influence the ending, the necessity to become the ideal of femininity of the time. I think it influenced the ending. When you're looking at Kamen na cesty, at the ending of Kamen na cesty, when the heroine did kill herself, I think that's the difference, not only in time when the novel was written, but also the social stance of the author, I think significantly influenced the outcome of the ending. And the second thing is actually the Plein Air was published in Czech Republic, in Czech, in 1919. So it was romanticized, rather. The translation is quite horrible, but it was heavily romanticized when you compare the Croatian version and Czech version. So that's it.
Yes, I'm sorry I forgot to mention the Czech.
No, it's not. It's not important, because I think it was, and it was actually published in a line that was romantic novels. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't received in the time as a psychological novel. And even when I was studying, my teacher told me it's a trash romantic novel. And I do remember, and I was curious about, it piqued my curiosity why it's a trash novel. So I opened it and I wasn't very impressed with Czech translation. Then I looked into Croatian version and I really did liked it and I find it fascinating. And when I was presenting this topic on a conference last fall, I also had with Susan, I had discussion and she told me that she probably chose this strategy because of the male narrative that was present in Croatian literature, that female authors uses the male tools in writing and the ending could be result of it.
Yes, yes, I agree. I was also thinking about this need for the happy ending, the marriage plot, and there are other two Croatian texts by male authors in the 19th century. There's one by Šenoa about a school teacher in a rural community, Branka. And it also has a independent heroine who gets married in the end. And there's another similar one by Ivan Perkovac, the teacher from Stankovac, never mind. And it's the same plot. And these are, I think, Zdenka, and these two heroines are the only independent heroines in Croatian 19th century, and they all get married in the end. But they don't have a tragic ending, and all the other women mostly have tragic. The other female heroines have tragic endings mostly, especially the femme fatales. So I guess you could see this as a kind of progress, and I agree, it could be seen as a compromise, as you say, because of the male narrative, of course. And I don't know if I'm doing Truhelka a disservice now by comparing her to more popular forms, because I think we have skipped a whole step in her interpretation and canonization in Croatian literary history, the step of reading this novel as a modernist novel. And now I'm reading it as a popular novel, but I think it should have been read 50 years ago or more as a modernist novel. So I don't know if this is a good strategy for remembering her, but of course I want to highlight that this is a psychological novel with modern elements, and it also does have the romance plot, as many of the other Croatian modern novels do, written by men. So well, thank you for your comment. I'm so glad you are researching this.
Thank you.
Okay, I raised my hand before, and there are many comments that I would like to make, but the first one is like, the first one concerns the classifying the women's novels. It's Jelena Dimitrijević, for instance, was for a long time classified as a realist, even anthropological writings person. And this modernist label was somehow, I don't know, reserved for men, or for something that sounded more important. But I wouldn't, at this point, compare the novel. I never heard before about Jagoda Truhelnik. Am I right? Truhelka's novel before. Plein air, but the very word plein air reminded me of a fragment by Angelija Lazarević. She's the daughter of the very important realist writer in Serbia, Laza Lazarević, and she wrote one novel and novella, actually one novella and some poems, and there are some fragments left because she lived very short life, but she was a paintress at the first place. So the plein air was figures in the fragments which were designated as wanderings in her heritage, whatever that would be. So this is why it interested me as much. And then at one point you said, and as for the popular writings. I think Magdalena Koch would have more to say about Miriam and probable comparison with Miriam and the writer you spoke about. But then at the end you said that all the literary history by men should be read in Croatia, should be read in a new way. And I would say at least regionally, it should be read in a completely new way, at least, if not in all the European countries or all the Balkans, at least again. So I think it's the popular literature was a very handy drawer to put all the women writers, all the aspiring women writers who didn't write actually something that we would call children's literature. So if they are there and if they appear to be really read and popular and so on, so you put them in there and they can be safe there and safely forgotten, I would say. So I think this is one thing that we should work upon jointly.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. Yes, thank you.
So I would like to hear if Magdalena is listening to us. I would like to hear something more, if she has any comments about Miriam, because I don't know much about Miriam, but I know Magdalena is into it, and it sounds to me so close. Maybe I'm not right, but she would correct me. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I agree with Masha's and Billian's position that this sort of literature treated earlier as trash novels and trash literature, or unworthy to read and write about, deserves much better reading and writing, academic writing. And I wrote about Milica Jakovljević, Miriam, who was also the first, or one of the first journalists in Serbia in the same, more or less, she lived in more or less the same years as Maria Jurić Zagorka. And from my point of view is that I think you in Croatia and specialists in Croatian literature achieved much more than Serbian specialists in treating, for instance, Miriam, because I think you have in Croatia annually conferences devoted to Maria Jurić Zagorka, and you also reread her, I think, or it's being reread until now. And the position of Miriam is not that good. Maybe it is good in filming, because there were some of serials, TV series made based on 6 or 5 novels written by Miriam, and they are very popular now. And I think we can also compare in some certain way maybe Maria Zagorka, but also Miriam, with Jane Austen, Jane Austen's position in British literature much earlier, 100 years earlier than those two Croatian and Serbian female authors living in the same country. Yes, the kingdom of Serb, Croats, and Slovenes, or later the kingdom of Yugoslavia. So I think they were read in that country in interwar periods. And they were also neglected after the Second World War, yes, in the second Yugoslavia, I can say, socialistic. And both treated as trash or bourgeois or whatever like this. So I'm very glad that also Diana and young generation, also some of my students were interested in this sort of literature and comparing modernist and pop literature or popular culture. And I think that feminist and cultural studies give us tools to analyze and refresh the position of this sort of writing. And absolutely, I think they should be introduced to the literary canon. And is Zagorka read by students of Croatian studies in Zagreb or other universities or not?
Yes, she is. But I have a MA thesis on her just this month, so there are often papers by students or MA thesis on Zagorka, and she is popular among students. I used to have a course on her, but I don't have it anymore. I didn't have it for the last couple of years, and it was a pretty popular course, and I was satisfied. But I'm still surprised by the lack of attention other women writers get in Croatian literary history. And there is several women authors that wrote in the 20s and 30s that were writing novels about the new woman and the position of women in a new capitalist society and so on. And some of them are really interesting, and most of them weren't even reprinted, and or reprinted by really small presses, and they're hard to get, and I don't think many students know about them. So maybe this should be our next step. Zagorka is getting so much attention, and maybe other women authors should get some of the attention that Zagorka is getting. I would really like to introduce them also into my research and teaching, and that's why I'm happy to hear that there are papers and conference papers on Truhelka. I was just aware of the ones that are available in Croatia, and that is such a small number. So this is an open field for new research.
As far as I know, one student in Poland at Adam Mickiewicz University, where I work, a Polish researcher, also writes her PhD about Ivana Berlic-Mażuranic's writing. So. And Biljana, do you know maybe is Maria Juric Zagorka read by students within Serbian studies at University of Belgrade?
I'm at the general literature department.
Yeah, I know.
I cannot know that. I sincerely doubt that. Yeah, and I think that there are so many, like Angelija Lazarević, whom I've just mentioned. I don't even know if they're aware of the fact that Laza Lazarević had a very talented daughter who wrote, and who had a friend for a friend, Milica Janković. I think that almost 99% of them have no idea about that. So my answer would be no. For 100% no.
Yes.
Unfortunately, because we have these Serbian studies, general literature studies, Anglophone studies, German studies, and the idea of Balkan studies was showed up at a certain point of time. We are now going through an accreditation, but that accreditation, unfortunately, is just re-accreditation. So things just keep on going on. So I think that we should if we want to change something, we should think in terms of projects which are outside the regular curricula, because especially the curricula of Serbian studies here, I don't think that women's studies, that women's literature would find much space. So it would be for what we did in Knjiženstvo, and if we can find out some other projects where we can talk about the Balkan literature, the regional literature, the ex-EU literature, or whatever we name it. But in the regular curricula, I doubt, because if you say women's literature, that's something dangerous, unknown, and God knows what that can bring. All these feminists and even worse, LGBT ideas and so on. Yeah.
I know, but I introduced this sort of women's literature, let's say that, into my curricula of
Magdalena,
my students.
I would like that.
And they are really very interested
your
in
curriculum.
Yes, and there is a lot of work to do in this field. And let us think about the Croatian-Serbian conference devoted to both Zagorka and Miriam. And let's compare interwar period in Kingdom of Yugoslavia and their positions as two very popular novelists and journalists, and who were writing their novels as series, yes, first in magazines and then published as books, yes, and they were very popular. And I have one question: is Maria Jurić Zagorka also filmed or brought into TV series in Croatia, or not yet?
Not yet. There's still the problem of copyright, which is very complicated with Zagorka, and it's really hard to obtain the rights. And there have been so many ideas and wishes for a series. It would be really popular, and I think I'm just waiting for the first one. There were some, I'm not really sure, but I think there were some silent films, but that was, I wasn't researching that, so I'm not really sure. But there is nothing at all, not a movie, no TV series, nothing. So we're waiting. There are only comic books, that's the only thing, but nothing audio-visual for now. So at least this sort of media is used in Serbian culture. Yes, because those films were very popular. Ranjeni orao i Jedne noći na Jadranu.
Yeah, but I must say that these series, you're talking about the series, they were like recreating what she wrote on the screen. But the best thing that I ever seen, I really couldn't bear to watch more than one episode of one of these series, and there was no distance between it. But the best thing I've ever seen was the Wounded Eagle, and that was the theater play, which was completely parodic. And that that's the real thing. I think that was the real approach, and that was like 10 years ago in Atelier 212. That was the real thing, and I was amazed that so many people would watch these series afterwards, without a distance, because there needs to be a distance in the time, because she's speaking about the old morale and about all these ideas. And this theater play was so brilliant in ridiculing all these parts of it. It was done by the same woman who made this Pop Čira and Pop Spira with Đorđe Balašević. You might remember the screenplay. So I was amazed that actually the story was not that completely new, and I saw it like at least 10 years ago. And I think that there must be, I really think that there must be a distance between all these things to say that we are now approaching this from the 21st century and we know all these traps and ideas and everything, but you know, this is important and this is laughable and this is like this. And these series at the TV, they were completely, I don't know, like, like we say, like literal readings of what was written there. And I didn't like them, I must say.
I have a question, and that's not related to Zagorka, but to these adaptations you were talking about. Aren't they rather disservice to the author? Because I did see partially Ranjani Orao, and it would never, I would never want to read anything by the other author when I saw these adaptations.
Yeah.
Which is question how these adaptations are working with the original text, and they are pushing the author rather on the margin than in the literary field.
Yeah.
Well, I can speak for the Serbian public. And when I would say the same thing that I said before, they would say, "Oh, that's just you. You know, you just want to be so exclusive." People loved it.
I know. I was in Belgrade and I was recommended to watch it.
They just
That
loved
was
it. And I
my
said,
feeling.
I wouldn't be able to watch it. Come on, you know, you go to the theater and watch the play. It's ridiculing most of the things. And they would say, you just want to ridicule everything, you know, we take seriously. So I wouldn't go further for the comment, but I know exactly what you think and I agree. But what I can say for all the writers that we want to, and I'm not thinking it only about women writers, because I always work with these underdogs, I would say, with those who are not in the canyon, not read, not pushed up. TV series, TV movies, anything, you know, anything that gives popularity, that's just the only way to push them through, the only way. So you push them anyway. You know, you can make a parody, you can make it really serious or anything that works. It's just important to have that name around and these even images or anything like that. But I know what you're thinking, and as you could see, I would agree with you completely.
I do sometimes have a fashion kind of inclination when I go to Croatia. I make pictures of Zagorka issues where they publish, and some of the covers are really, really fantastic because they are sometimes very serious, very kind of traditional, and sometimes they have very naked ladies in several positions on the covers of Zagorka. So I think that the reception of Zagorka in that way in society is quite wide. And she's beloved, I think. She's even very popular in Czech Republic, which you would never guess. She was translated, firstly, her historical novels were translated in the 1990s by famous Czech translator Dušan Karpatský. He made a translation because he kind of wanted to publish some serious authors, and publishing house Ivo Železný offered him contract, and he said, okay, I will make you successful release of books, and you will publish me some serious stuff. And they published the Grická Vieštica, and they were shocked how popular it was. It was printed and printed again and again, and then it was picked up by serious publishing house because Ivo Železný was a romantic novels publisher, and it was even popular in the serious publishing house. So it is popular even till this day, even not in Croatia, and in Slovakia even more.
That's great. That's great to hear. I don't know. Maybe we should. Magda, what do you think about the letters from Niš and harems with this, front pages? Well, I would say that anything that works is great. So use everything. And then we should come with the serious readings of this, but just push up front and make them remember the name. This is so very important. The way we got into the school curricula by Yelena Dimitrievich, I think it wouldn't be possible without publishing her novel, her travelogues by the publishing house that makes you find the books wherever you go. Even if you go to buy groceries, you would find these books. So this is so important to have it in front of your eyes. So I think that's the main strategy. And then you come with the academic readings and academic guidance, I would say. So this is very interesting. Thank you very much.
I think this is precisely Zagorka's strategy, to present everything in a popular way first, and then to maybe have a serious discussion later. But that was her idea, and that's why she wrote popular novels, because that was what she could sell, and she could sell her ideas, her political ideas, in this way. That's very interesting. Thank you for your comments and the great discussion. I'm really happy to talk to all of you and hear your feedback. So thank you.
Thank you, Masha. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. So I just have to announce our next webinar, which will be held by Alenka Jensterle-Dolezal, who is today also with us. So perhaps Alenka can just tell the topic, but we haven't agreed about the date yet, so we cannot, or you can propose something here in the small group as we are, but perhaps just about the topic of your presentation in May. Okay, at the end of the May. It will be also in May, I think.
Yes, thank you, Katya. Thank you. I think it will be, we will discuss about the date later, but the topic is women writers, South Slavic women writers in Prague, in Czech culture in the beginning of the 20th century. And I want to underline the cultural relations between Zsofia Tőzsdei, of course, and this is the Slovene court, also lived in the beginning of the 20th century in Prague, and the other also is Serbian author, which lived in 20th and 30th in Prague. That was Luka Klapic-Georgievich, and both of them were connected family. But still, I don't have. This is the main topic, and then I will decide the other things.
So probably in the last week of May.
Yes, perhaps if it is possible, the first week of June also, because I'm now in Slovenia and I will be going back at the end of May. So okay. We will discuss it.
We will discuss it and announce it on Facebook and on our website, so you will be informed. Okay, thank you very much for all your comments, and special thanks to Masha for this really wonderful presentation, and have a nice evening, and hopefully see you soon all again. Bye-bye.
See you soon. Bye.